Jamie and Laurel McAllister thought they were starting a new life when they moved into the quiet brick house on Sycamore Lane. But the moment they tore down the kitchen wall, they uncovered something far older and far darker than peeling wallpaper. A sealed box filled with bones, photographs of missing women, and secrets that had been buried for over 40 years. Jamie and Laurel McAllister had never planned to move to a small town. But when they stumbled upon the red brick house on Sycamore Lane, something about it felt right. Nestled at the edge of Brookridge, North Carolina, it had a quiet charm, tree-lined streets, white picket fences, and the kind of stillness that suggested safety. The house itself was older, built in the 1950s, with creaky floors and an avocado green kitchen that hadn't been updated in decades. The real estate listing called it a fixer-upper with potential. That was what drew them in. They bought it at a good price. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Stone, had passed away the year before, and the house had sat empty ever since. There had been no estate sale, no family claims, just a quick sale and the keys handed over without much fuss. The couple moved in late spring, with plans to start renovations immediately. Laurel focused on the living room and bedrooms, while Jamie took on the kitchen. He started by removing the old cabinets along the far wall. Most came off easily, though the last one, closest to the corner, seemed oddly attached, almost like it had been added later. Jamie worked at the wood, trying not to damage the surrounding wall. But when he finally pried the cabinet off, he noticed something strange. Behind it wasn't drywall like the rest of the room, but a narrow section bricked up in uneven rows. The bricks were newer, not part of the original construction. Someone had sealed something inside that wall, and they hadn't wanted it to be found. He called for Laurel, and together they stared at the odd patch of masonry. Curiosity got the better of him, and with a hammer and chisel, Jamie started removing the bricks one by one. Dust filled the air. It didn't take long before the hollow cavity behind the bricks revealed itself. Inside was a metal box, wrapped tightly in layers of aged plastic. It was heavy. When he peeled back the wrapping and pried the lid open, what they saw inside made them both step back. There were bones, small, fragile, unmistakably human. Alongside them, a stack of old Polaroids, some yellowed with age, showing young women in what looked like that very kitchen. Many were visibly pregnant. Most looked distressed. Beneath the photos were clippings from local newspapers, all reporting missing persons cases from the late 1970s and early 1980s. One of them, still sharp despite the years, showed a young woman with long dark hair and the headline, "Local Teen Disappears After Entering Maternity Home." Laurel called the police while Jamie sat in silence, the box still open between them. When officers arrived, they quickly sealed off the house. Over the next few hours, what had started as a routine renovation turned into a full-scale investigation. News vans showed up the next morning. Yellow tape cordoned off the quiet street. Neighbors whispered from porches and behind curtains. Something had been hidden in that kitchen for decades, and now it was finally out. The police wasted no time in turning the McAllisters' home into a full-scale crime scene. Forensics teams arrived with cameras, scanners, and evidence kits, setting up temporary lights and cordoning off the entire kitchen. Jamie and Laurel were taken in for questioning, not as suspects, but as witnesses to something far bigger than they could understand. The box they had found became the centerpiece of the investigation. But it was the contents that truly unsettled the authorities. The bones were the first priority. Small and brittle, they were carefully catalogued and sent to the state crime lab for testing. Initial impressions suggested they belonged to more than one infant, at least 2, possibly 3. They had been preserved in a way that indicated deliberate concealment, but it was the stack of photographs that caused an immediate stir. Each Polaroid was labeled with a year written in fading ink, ranging from 1978 to 1984. The backgrounds were consistent. Each photo had been taken in the same kitchen where the box was found. The outdated cabinets, linoleum floor, and yellow curtains that still hung in the window today appeared in every image. The women in the photos were young, no older than early 20s. Some were clearly pregnant. Others held newborns in their arms. None were smiling. The expressions in the photos varied. Some women looked scared, others vacant, like they were being posed for the camera against their will. A few appeared bruised. It was clear these weren't family pictures. These were records of something darker. Each photo was chilling, but when detectives began cross-referencing them with old missing persons reports, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. Many of the faces matched names from cases filed decades earlier, young women who had vanished after seeking help for unplanned pregnancies. Most of them had one thing in common. They had once been residents of the Brookridge House for Unwed Mothers, a now defunct Catholic maternity home that had quietly operated on the outskirts of town until a mysterious fire destroyed it in 1985. After the fire, no formal investigation had taken place. The building was left in ruins, the land sold off. The home had served as a place where troubled young women were sent to correct their mistakes, often under pressure from families or religious leaders. Many never returned home. The newspaper, clippings in the box, offered further evidence. Each one described a missing girl, the dates matching those written on the backs of the photos. The clippings were carefully cut out, almost surgically, and preserved in plastic sleeves. Some of the stories were short, just a paragraph or two. Others were longer, interviews with grieving parents or frustrated police. But no bodies had ever been found. No arrests made. No answers given. With this new evidence, detectives turned their attention to the house's former owner, Margaret Stone. Her name hadn't appeared in the clippings or photos, but county records revealed she had worked as a nurse at the Brookridge maternity home during the exact years the girls had gone missing. And now, after decades of silence, it seemed the house she left behind was starting to speak. Margaret Stone had lived a quiet life in Brookridge, the kind of life that left little behind to examine. After retiring in the early 1990s, she rarely interacted with neighbours and seldom left the house on Sycamore Lane. Her lawn was always trimmed, her mail picked up, and the curtains always drawn. To most people, she was just a solitary older woman with no family, no visitors, and no drama. But now, with the discovery in her kitchen, everything about her seemed worth questioning. Investigators began digging into her background, starting with her employment history. Personnel records from decades earlier confirmed that Margaret had worked as a nurse at the Brookridge House for Unwed Mothers. She had started there in 1976 and left in 1985, the same year the facility burned down. The timing raised eyebrows. She had left her position just weeks before the fire that destroyed nearly all documentation connected to the home and its residents. Fire department reports at the time labelled the blaze accidental, caused by faulty wiring, but no official inspection had followed. The building was uninsured and declared a total loss. There were no surviving administrative records, but interviews with former staff and residents painted a grim picture. The maternity home, once seen as a place of guidance and protection, was described by some as controlling and secretive. Young women were brought there from across the state, often by parents or religious groups, to give birth away from the public eye. Once admitted, contact with the outside world was limited. Letters were monitored. Visits were rare. Many of the women were told their babies would be adopted, though there were few formal adoption records ever filed. Margaret's role at the facility was described as routine. She assisted with births, distributed medication, and cared for both mothers and infants. No one remembered her being particularly warm or cruel. She was simply there, quiet and efficient. But some former residents recalled her being present during moments of fear, emergency deliveries, sudden disappearances, unexplained procedures. One woman, now in her 60s, told detectives she remembered a girl in the next room going into labor late one night, only to vanish by morning. The staff offered no explanation. When she asked questions, she was told not to speak of it again. With every lead, the image of Margaret Stone became more complicated. Her death the previous year had gone unnoticed by most. Natural causes, no next of kin. A basic obituary ran in the local paper. Her belongings were minimal, her will straightforward. The house was to be sold, with proceeds donated to a religious charity. There was no mention of the past, but when forensic teams returned to the house for a deeper search, they made another discovery. Underneath the floorboards in the kitchen, directly beneath the space where the box had been hidden, were fragments of fabric and a rusted object that appeared to be a piece of jewelry, a locket, still holding a faded photograph of a young woman. It was a clue that someone else had been buried here in silence, and that Margaret had known far more than she ever let on. The investigation reached a turning point when the bones discovered in the kitchen were sent for DNA testing. After weeks of waiting, the results came back. The remains belonged to 3 different infants, all male, all likely under 3 months old at the time of death. None of them had ever been reported as deceased. No birth certificates, no death records. Officially, they had never existed. But science had preserved a thread of truth, and that thread led to someone still alive. In a secure laboratory in Raleigh, one of the infant's DNA samples matched a woman in the national database. Her name was Rachel Meyer, a 44-year-old schoolteacher who lived just a few miles from Brookridge. The match was partial, indicating a sibling relationship. Investigators reached out to Rachel, who was shocked to hear from them. She had been adopted as a baby, or so she had always been told. Her adoptive parents had long since passed away, and she knew little about her early life. When detectives explained the reason for the contact, Rachel was hesitant at first, thinking it must be a mistake. But when they showed her the photograph found in the locket beneath the floorboards, a photo of a young woman with dark hair and familiar eyes, something inside her shifted. She had seen that face before in an old scrapbook her adoptive mother kept. It was labelled only as Lisa. That name matched one of the missing women from the newspaper clippings, Lisa Meyer, who disappeared in 1981 after entering the Brookridge maternity home at the age of 17. Records confirmed it. Lisa had been pregnant when she entered the facility. She was never seen again. The assumption at the time was that she had run away, perhaps overwhelmed by the stigma of teen pregnancy. No body had ever been found, no baby reported. And yet, here was Rachel, her daughter, alive and well, completely unaware of the darkness surrounding her birth. Rachel was devastated. She had unknowingly lived her entire life in the shadow of a tragedy. Her mother had died, likely in the house on Sycamore Lane, and her infant brother's remains had been hidden beneath the floor. Ever since, it was clear Lisa had given birth to twins, or at least 2 children, but something had gone terribly wrong. As Rachel processed the news, investigators began matching other DNA samples from the case to possible relatives. They opened dozens of old missing persons files. Families who had long stopped hoping for answers suddenly received calls from detectives. Some broke down. Others were angry. A few were too afraid to know the truth. But Rachel agreed to go public. She wanted people to know what had happened, not just to her mother, but to all the forgotten women and children linked to the house and the maternity home. Her story became national news, and with it, the cold silence surrounding Brookridge started to crack. The past was no longer buried. The truth had a name, and it began to speak through the people still left behind. As investigators continued to peel back the layers of the case, the town of Brookridge found itself at the center of a story it had long ignored. People who had once dismissed the rumors about the maternity home now watched as those whispers hardened into facts. The Brookridge House for Unwed Mothers had operated for nearly 2 decades under a veil of respectability, promoted as a sanctuary for young women in difficult circumstances. But what emerged from the evidence inside the kitchen on Sycamore Lane was something far more sinister, something systematic, concealed, and terrifying. Authorities began reaching out to anyone still alive who had worked at or passed through the maternity home. Many were reluctant to speak. Some cited confidentiality. Others claimed to remember nothing unusual, but a few, now elderly and removed from the pressures of the time, began to open up. One former volunteer recalled being told never to ask about the babies who didn't make it. Another remembered seeing Margaret Stone with newborns that were never officially recorded. These children, they suspected, were never meant to leave the building. Then came the discovery that shifted the investigation from one of personal guilt to institutional silence. Old property records revealed that Margaret Stone hadn't purchased the Sycamore Lane house herself. It had been transferred to her from a private religious trust associated with the same organization that once operated the maternity home. There had never been any public record of this transaction. It was done quietly, under layers of paperwork, just months after the fire. This revelation suggested that Margaret's actions may not have been hers alone. She had been placed in that house, possibly to keep watch over evidence, or to ensure it never saw the light of day. Whether she acted under orders or simply carried the burden alone, no one could be sure. But the financial trail led to names, individuals who had held positions of authority within the religious trust, long retired or deceased, who may have known what was happening inside those walls. In the end, no arrests were made. The primary suspect was already dead. The institutions involved had dissolved or restructured years earlier, but the court of public opinion delivered its own form of justice. The trust's surviving leaders issued statements of regret, vague apologies wrapped in legal caution. For the families, it wasn't enough. The house on Sycamore Lane was eventually sold again. The new owners gutted the kitchen, replacing every surface, every memory. But they couldn't change what had been uncovered there. The town placed a memorial plaque at the edge of the former maternity home site, now an overgrown field. It read simply, "For the forgotten mothers and the children who never came home." The secrets they found in that kitchen didn't just expose a hidden crime. They forced a reckoning. With each photo, each clipping, and each bone carefully uncovered, the walls of silence came crashing down. And while justice may have come too late, the truth, after decades of darkness, was no longer buried.